All right, we got a big episode of the Shea Anything podcast for you today. Keith Hernandez joins us once again. We're going to get his reaction to the Jared Porter hiring, the James McCann potential signing, George Springer, Trevor Bauer, Jake Odorizzi, the bullpen. Let's play lineup around the infield. A huge jam-packed show for you starts now. And welcome to another edition of the Shea Anything podcast. Doug Williams and Keith Hernandez with you. A reminder to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And by the way, over the air this week, we have a big Mets Hot Stove show. That's Wednesday night on SNY. It's an hour because they have exclusive interviews with Sandy Alderson and Luis Rojas Wednesday at 6:30 right after Baseball Night in New York, which is the show that I will be appearing on Wednesday night. Keith, in a Frankenstein t-shirt, how are you? How have you been keeping busy? What's new?
How have I been keeping busy? Gosh, I got all the time on my hands in the world. No one telling me what to do. I feel very fortunate. The weather has been terrific down here. I've been working out, trying to lose some weight, stay in shape, reading, passing the time, and keeping track, of course, of all these events that are unfolding with the New York Metropolitans.
Of course, because there's a lot to keep track of. So let's start with Jared Porter, Keith. And, you know, my opinion not being the important one, I've heard so many opinions the past week or so about him and people who know him. He seems to be really highly regarded by a lot of different areas of the baseball world. And the reason that I feel confident about the hire is because I just keep hearing different people basically giving their opinion on him and why he's the perfect guy to potentially lead a team, even though he's only 41 years old. Do you think it's important that this is somebody with a scouting background who can talk to that veteran scout and also talk to the analytics group in a potential front office, and he can kind of translate between both of those worlds?
Well, you know, the game has had tremendous changes with analytics, and I was slow convert to analytics. There are a lot of great things that can be gleaned from it. I think his background, I do not know Jared, and obviously he's got 4 world championship rings and 2 very important ones. He was part of that Red Sox drought that finally ended that drought, and of course the Cubs. He started out, it's very interesting, you read his bio, he started out basically as an intern and worked his way up through every facet and division of the game, to the minor leagues and up. So he's got a well-rounded modern baseball education and experience that he brings. And listen, this is Sandy's hire, and I think that it's important. I think Sandy this time around wants to have people that he can work with, and he's in control. He's going to bring his people in. He's going to allow, of course, Jared was mentioning, he was going to bring in more people. They're going to improve on I guess what they call the infrastructure of the organization, which is minor leagues and up. That's the foundation of every organization, building on their analytics department. So it's going to be a more modern organization, more up to speed, and you've got an owner, I feel, that wants to win. You're going to have a very motivated general manager in Jared. It's a big opportunity for him. I mean, come on, he's waited in the wings. He's been in the game. He's 40 years old, and now he's a general manager of the New York Mets, a New York franchise, a team that hasn't had a world championship in over 30 years. What a great opportunity for him. And I just think it's going to be a very positive thing. And I'm very anxious to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, I love that he's come all the way up the ladder, to your point about him basically starting as an intern. He said yesterday, dominate every job or every role you're in. And I thought that was really telling in terms of how he's gotten here, from being at the bottom of the totem pole until he got here. So you talking about Sandy's hire. And let's zoom out a little bit to remember what the Mets originally wanted to do here, which was make Sandy the president. So, you know, everything is underneath him in the organization, whether it's like catering or strength and performance or training staff, analytics, baseball ops, all of that, to now Sandy's that and the president of baseball ops with a GM under him who's just 40 years old, basically. What do you think about where the Mets ended up? Where do you think about the fact that they have a young GM as opposed to the big name potential president of baseball ops under Sandy that they originally planned on doing?
Sandy has a history of making interesting hires. Mickey Callaway came out of the blue. No one expected him to hire Mickey Callaway, who was a pitching coach at Cleveland at the time, and it was his first time as a manager. So I think Sandy's willing to take chances and give opportunity. But I think this one here, it's not the same kind of hire. Where Mickey Callaway was a pitching coach, had no managerial experience, no bench coach experience, just very compartmentalized, whatever that's the proper way to pronounce it, with pitching. Where Jared Porter we talked about the well-rounded baseball. And I think that this is a big opportunity for Sandy too. He's had health issues. He's gone through a lot recently, and this could be his bon voyage, his final great, put a little cherry on top of the pie, so to speak, on top of the cake. Have a successful turning this organization around. It hasn't won in over 30 years. So I think going forward, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see. I think that you mentioned Sandy's got all this stuff he's got to do. He's president. From top to bottom in the organization, he is going to delegate, authority to Jared. He's going to give him. He's going to be making the decisions. Sandy's going to have some influence and input, but I think he's going to give the whole shebang to Jared and say, "You go and run."
Yeah, that's really what I'm most curious about, because I think. To my original question, I think there were Mets fans, especially when Theo Epstein left the Cubs, it was like, oh, that would be great. You've got Sandy at the very top, and then you hire somebody like that with that pedigree as the president of baseball ops. Now, I don't think that was ever really a possibility, but once the Mets tried to hire for that position and realized they weren't getting a lot of permission to talk to people for that position, it became clear they were going to hire somebody like Jared Porter to be the GM. And look, I'm curious, I'm picturing, let's say the Mets sign George Springer, and we'll talk about him in a second. Who will, on a national TV show, who will get the credit for that signing? Will ESPN and other networks be saying, yeah, Sandy Alderson signed this deal, or will they be saying, yeah, Jared Porter made this contract signing? Who is going to be given credit for, or maybe had credit taken away for bad moves or good moves? I'm just curious, because Sandy is a big name in the industry, and with him as Jared Porter's boss, he may be the guy that people talk about as the decision maker in that front office. But to your point, maybe that's incorrect. Maybe he'll give Jared Porter a lot of reign to make decisions.
I think he will, and I don't think there'll be any finger pointing. And I don't want to bring any attention on me, but to me, it's a similar situation in '85 when we acquired Gary Carter, which was really the final piece. And I knew the press were waiting to see. He had two egos, two big players, myself, and now Gary Carter, who was this big personality. Were we going to get along? And I made it a point that Gary Carter, and I knew Gary anyway, I've been playing against him and liked Gary, but I was going to make a point that this was never going to happen, that we were going to work together and one goal to get a World Series. And I think it's a similarity right here with Sandy and Jared. I don't think there'll be any finger pointing. I think it'll be, to me, it'll be the moves will be Jared's, and whether good or bad. You're in New York. It's a tough town with the press. You make a bad move, they make a bad move. Make a good move, they raise you up. So I think he's prepared for that. He's been in this game, Jared, and he's that's a huge opportunity for him. It's got to be a lifetime goal for him to be a general manager. And at the age of 40, it's really amazing.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up, and actually it comes back to Theo Epstein. So, when Theo Epstein was in Chicago, Jed Hoyer was underneath him. And Jed Hoyer's, he's a big name baseball executive, but when the Cubs would make a big free agent signing like John Lester or Yu Darvish, we'd all be like, wow, Theo Epstein. And we judge Theo Epstein on the free agent signings, when in reality, I think Jed Hoyer was involved. I think it's a big collaboration in a front office these days. So I'm curious to know if people like me in other markets will be saying Sandy Alderson with that signing or Jared Porter with that signing. We'll see how that works out. So let's get into James McCann, Keith, because this deal's not yet official. Maybe it will be by the time people are listening to this. But the Mets have their catcher. And you're big on experience. You're big on, you're putting together a resume. And James McCann doesn't have much of one. He's never been a full-time big league catcher.
Right.
So how much of a risk do you think this is to give this guy a 4-year, $40 million reported contract to be your starting catcher when he hasn't really proven that he can do that?
Well, he's had one good year. Was it 2019? And he did not, was it 19 or was it 18? I'm not sure. He's had a spotty career. He hasn't really had a body of work where you can say, okay, you get a player after 4 or 5 years in the big leagues. Okay, we're going to get 280 out of him, 15 home runs, 80 RBIs. He hasn't reached that point yet. It's obvious to me the Mets have addressed early, without a general manager right now, so it's strictly Sandy making these moves, that they've addressed the issues that I feel are most important. And A, it's the bullpen, and B, we needed a catcher. So I'm kind of glad. JT Realmuto is a very fine talent. I don't want to denigrate him at all, but to pay that kind of money for him at his age, he's really kind of like a John Stearns kind of catcher, that kind of same build, can run, can throw, athletic. I just, with the price and the amount of years, I'm kind of glad they went the other direction. I don't know anything about McCann other than what I've seen now in Baseball Reference, looking at his numbers and what I've read in the paper. I know that he's gotten a lot of praise from some of the White Sox coaching staff. So, it remains to be seen. Now, I don't know this guy. The Mets have the database. They know what they're getting. And they went this direction. But it was a definite need that needed to be filled. And they've also added some pieces to the bullpen. So I think they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think the caught stealing numbers for McCann behind the plate since 2019 are around somewhere in the 30% range.
Yeah, I think so.
And Mets catchers have been around 10%. So it's a definite upgrade defensively. The framing numbers were pretty good this past year. He had a good 2020, but again, shortened season. He's been an all-star. So I like the signing. I didn't mean to ask you a leading question there, Keith, but because that doesn't represent how I feel. I like the signing, but I know that there are people out there that are skeptical about it because he doesn't have that proven track record and he's getting a contract for somebody who might. So to your point about Realmuto versus McCann, I wanted to play, we didn't play any Jared Porter sound bites from yesterday, but I did want to play one from Sandy Alderson yesterday. He was asked by Maggie Gray of WFAN about why he chose McCann over Realmuto. And he didn't really have to entertain that answer because the deal is not yet official. So I thought Sandy might say, well, it's not official yet. We'll wait and talk about that later. He gave a candid answer as to why he went with the McCann contract over Realmuto. So take a listen.
We did have discussions with JT and his representatives, and they were great conversations. I think that, more than anything else, this was a timing issue for us. We have a number of needs, and, we can afford to wait to fill some of them. We can't afford to wait to fill all of them. And so this wasn't a compromise pick. We've been engaged with James for a considerable period of time. There's a lot we like about James. And so, in terms of the two of them, part of it was our really strong interest in James and what he's done over the last couple of years, what we think he can do for us going forward. But, you know, at the same time, we have had conversations with JT.
So for those of us who were hoping for another speedy off season after a couple slow ones, that answer doesn't necessarily inspire you with confidence. And this may be another slow one with the big free agents out there. What do you think, Keith, about the fact that Sandy decided to go with the guy that he knew he could sign soon, to put that behind him, behind the plate, and move forward to other areas of need, as opposed to waiting until potentially January to see what the Real Muto market is?
Well, the other thing, the one thing is too, is that you could lose McCann. McCann can turn around on the open market and agree to sign with someone. So there was a little bit of immediacy, I think, there. And I do feel that if Real Muto, and again, I'm not ragging on him. Is he a guy that is going to be the difference to make you a winner? And I just think he's a very good player, but he's not what Gary Carter was for us getting that. I think if Real Muto was that kind of player, I think with the new ownership, they would have jumped at it and paid the money. But at the same time, you sit and wait, and you can't blame Real Muto. He's a free agent. He's one of the top free agents in the game, and he's going to listen to all and try to get the best deal, and it could drag on through the winter meetings. And the Mets need to get a foundation going on here to turn it around. So that's what I think had a lot to do with Sandy's thinking. And look in terms, we're not in need of a big bat.
Right.
This Met roster, the everyday players, it is a solid lineup, particularly if Bam Bam comes back. It's a sophomore jinx kind of year. You know how I feel about sophomore jinx. I believe in sophomore jinx. If he can come back, I'm not asking for 50 home runs. I mean, come on, that was just incredible. But 30 home runs, 100 RBIs. With the lineup that we have, it wasn't essential really to get a real big bat. And we needed to fill the catching department, and not just offensively, defensively.
Okay, so with that in mind, because I totally agree with you, this is a Mets lineup that already has a middle of the lineup. So let's move to George Springer then, because he is a middle of the lineup bat, Keith. He also fills a need like James McCann did. So while the Mets just needed a catcher and not a middle of the lineup bat, they could potentially get both in center, a good defensive center fielder who's also a middle of the lineup bat. Would that be your next move? Would George Springer be the next guy if you were Jared Porter or Sandy Alderson that you would look to signing?
Well, if you've got the dough, if you got the glue, you certainly are filling the other end. To me, the priorities were always pitching. To me, the number one priority was improving our pitching, our bullpen. Remember, we're not going to have Syndergaard for probably the first half of the season, although I'm sure he's working his fanny off, and he may be ahead of schedule. Who knows?
Yeah, he's shirtless somewhere, ahead of his schedule. That working out somewhere.
Working out outside without a t-shirt on somewhere, I'm sure. So the immediacy to me, number one, is always pitching. To me, number two is a catcher, and then number three is center fielder. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to spend money, Springer is certainly, he hustles. He's a good guy. He's a good teammate. You can tell. I think he's conscientious. He's got good years ahead of him. That's a big consideration. If you're gonna put money out there, I just feel. Jim Cott told me a long time ago when I signed my 5-year deal with the Cardinals, and back in '79, Jim Cott said, you got to know who you're giving the long-term contracts to. And back then it meant a little more because everybody gets long-term contracts now. But those guys that have pride, that want to live up to the contract, you've got to read into that person, their character. It's easy to become a fat cat, and get lazy. And I don't think Springer is, I don't think that's in his DNA.
Boy, Jim Cott is still saying smart things about baseball all these years later. I love listening to him, but we've had examples in this market of guys you don't give long-term contracts to. I think Jacoby Ellsbury was a good example with that with the Yankees, and Yoenis Cespedes, obviously with the Mets. That didn't turn out the way that they thought it would, although I still think it was a contract they needed to sign. So am I to believe, Keith, based on what you're saying, that you would go Bauer over Springer right now?
That's a tough question. Boy. So run by our rotation without right now. We're going to have DeGrom. Matz is coming back. We'll see. I can see them keeping Matz because he does have potential. Jim Cott, again, I'll mention. Jim Cott said if he was the pitching coach, he would focus on Matz keeping his fastball down. He goes, you get the ball upstairs when you're at a straight fastball, the ball finds the fence, and particularly in today's game. So we'll say Stroman is back. Who else have we got? Oh, the left-hander.
David Peterson.
We don't know about that. There's a lot of ifs. So do you take Bauer over Springer? That's a very, very tough question. That's a very, very, I think that Bauer would thrive in New York. He's that kind of guy that, he's a smart guy. I don't think that he's a guy that's going to crumble and be one of those players that say, well, he could never play in New York. There's a lot of guys that just can't play in New York. I think that he'll thrive in New York, just knowing him from the outside. I don't know him personally, but I think he's the kind of personality that would thrive here in New York. So I'm dodging the question.
I mean, it's a tough one. It's not our money, so that helps. So it would be easy for us to be like, well, sign both. I mean, they're both needs. But I think realistically, it's one or the other, which is still a great position to be in if you're a Met fan. But this is the conversation that every Met fan is having with their friends right now, Keith. And I think some people are very opinionated on both sides. But I don't know. I mean, if you look at a rotation with DeGrom, Bauer, let's say in July or August, DeGrom, Bauer, Syndergaard, Stroman, Peterson, Matz maybe is your long man, or you use him as a lefty out of the bullpen. I mean,
double headers. You still got to have double headers. They're still going to be there. They're going to be rainouts. You need that. You need that sixth pitcher.
And man, I mean, that sounds great. And look, Jackie Bradley Jr. is an example of an elite defensive center fielder who's also a free agent who's going to cost you very little. So compared to Springer. So I think there are ways to mix and match. Now, if you decide to go with Springer and you also want to add your rotation, Keith, you're talking about Jake Odorizzi, or maybe you sign Liam Hendriks in addition to Trevor May, the guy they already signed, to try and bolster your bullpen and build from the back end. Which of those scenarios do you think is better? Bauer and like Jackie Bradley Jr. in center. This is another way of asking the same question. Or Springer in center field and Odorizzi or Liam Hendriks.
Well, I'll always side on the side of pitching. So I'll lean towards Bauer, but pitchers are funny. Their careers rely on their arms, and if something goes south on their arm, and it's a lot of pitching, a lot of innings on Bauer. Bauer's in great shape, and you just don't know. That's the risk you take with pitchers. Their careers rely on their arm. If their arm goes, even if it's with today's medical advances, it's still, if you have a major surgery, you're out for a year. And he's not getting any younger. So those are the risks that you're taking. But, this is why they pay the big bucks to Jared Porter. And those are the decisions that he's going to have to make. And I like the fact that you mentioned that he said that, he was going to be in charge in command, because you can't have a wishy-washy, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? General manager. You got to have a manager that's going to be firm and confident in his decision and stick by his decision and do what he feels is the right thing.
Yeah, and he also was asked about that. I can't remember if we've done a podcast with you since Andy's reporting on this, but Andy basically reported that there were people out there, execs and in other front offices, who were a little hesitant to take the job with the Mets because the owner is saying, I want to win a World Series in the next 3 to 5 years. And if you've got a great job somewhere, you might be hesitant to take that job knowing that, I mean, if we go to the NLCS 2 out of the next 4 years and we don't win a World Series, I might be out of a job. So why would I leave this one? So that was Andy's reporting. And I think Porter was asked about that multiple times. And he said, that motivates me. That's the kind of thing that brought me to this job. So if that's his answer to that question, Keith, that means he's going to be all in on these moves to try and win in a short window.
And you noted in his comments, he's looked over the roster. He thinks that there's an enormous potential with this club, the roster, and everyday players. So he's not walking into what Frank Cashin walked into in 1980, whatever it was, when Doubleday and Wilpons took over. A horrible team. He's walking into a team that's pretty talented, and I think he recognizes that, and I think it's that saying that from Mr. Cohn saying 3 to 5 years. I think that's a pretty fair bargain right there. Hey, I've got a good roster here. 3 to 5 years, I'll take that. That gives me plenty of time to get a plan in action. And if you can't win by the 5th year, whatever happens, happens. You never know. But the opportunity is certainly there. There's a lot of upside in this organization.
Yeah, I think that got into a bigger conversation in terms of the 3 to 5 years thing, which was an interesting one about sustainable success versus, winning a World Series and like how so many of the good franchises right now have won very infrequently, whereas there's been a lot of one-offs. And I think that gets into that Mets fans are just going to have a consistent kind of team that's in it. And that's really all you can ask for. And I think Cohen saying 3 to 5 years, it's only a good thing for Mets fans at home. It's like, okay, I agree. It would be nice to win a World Series in that short of a window.
Yeah, and I do think Robinson Cano, he's out. It's terrible. It's not a good thing, but from a purely financial point of view, it also frees up over $20 million for the Mets to build on this roster.
Yeah.
So I mean, I like Robbie and and all that, but purely I think, and I'm speculating here, I think the Mets kind of like having that extra $20 million to kick into their budget.
So if quickly, the last thing we'll do, let's look at the Mets infield, Keith. So let's say that they're not active on the trade market, that the Mets pretty much exclusively are dealing with free agency, because I know Sandy is hesitant to give up more from their farm system. So that means that you're not trading Ahmed Rosario or Andres Jimenez, Jeff McNeil, JD Davis. And let's say, for the sake of this exercise, that they have the DH. So the Dom and Pete thing is figured out. What do you, with Cano out, as you mentioned, what do you want?
Real quick, the commissioner came out and told all the NL teams not to build your team around a DH. So there's your wild card right there.
Yeah,
they're pretty much told him it may not happen.
I know, and I think there was some speculation that memo was just for the sake of just preparation. Prepare like you. Right. Like you won't have the DH, and if they do, no one's going to complain. So let's say they do. What do you think their infield should look like? And like, for example, do you think there's a clear-cut favorite between Rosario and Jimenez? Is McNeil your everyday second baseman with Cano out? Is JD Davis consistent enough to play third base every day?
Well, I think if there's a DH, I think Pete's going to be the DH predominantly, and because Dom's got a much better glove over there. I think McNeil. I mean, you've got all these options now. It's much like what the Cubs had. That you can move McNeil around, and and as a result, you got 26 players, excuse me, and who knows how they're going to start this year. I think you're still going to maybe have, because of this COVID, 30. Remember last year it was 30 the first 2 weeks in the roster, active roster. Then it was second week it was in the third week it went down to 28, and I think we're going to have the same scenario this year. So you don't know, are the rosters going to be 30 or are they going to start out at 26? McNeil will be predominantly the second baseman, I think, and you can flip around. I know that I don't know Jared. I know that Rosario, with his lack of walks, doesn't sit well with Sandy. But Jared is the GM, and I've got to think the GM is on the same wavelength as Sandy, because they're going to be working together. Those are good problems to have. And as a manager, Luis, the big thing is how do you interweave your bench players and make them feel a part of the team? That's the toughest job of a manager. Last year, it was a 60-game sprint. So you just went out there with your boys. But on 162, particularly in today's game, they give them rests. You've got to interweave all the bench players and make them feel like they're a part. So yes, Davis can play third base. McNeil can play third base. You can Rosario at shortstop. That's him. He's a shortstop. But you can interweave the youngster.
Yeah, Jimenez can play a little bit everywhere.
There's a lot of options. I worry about the corner outfield, not left field in particular, not Conforto. Conforto really improved defensively last year. I thought played a really good right field. But I don't like Dom out in left. And, JD Davis doesn't cover a lot of ground. So all the more important to have a really good center fielder that can cover a lot of ground. It's a big ballpark.
So now you're coming up on the other side of your answer earlier as to why center field might be a really important place to look, because I totally agree with you. And if you sign George Springer, then maybe you need less, offense out of third base, and Andres Jimenez can play there, and JD Davis could be a bench player. And that way you really improve your defensive infield with Jimenez playing every day, no matter what position he plays, third or second. McNeil can go to the other. Again, good problems to have.
Yes.
But these are the Mets roster decisions that I'm sure we will learn more about in the coming weeks and months. But let's leave it there, Keith, because we've discussed a lot in this episode, and a lot of these answers will come, and we'll be able to talk about them when they do. Until then, Keith, Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays. Thank you for joining us. To all our listeners, we will talk to you next time.
Yep.
I'm sure this will be busy in the next few months, so we'll be talking to you. Happy holidays to everybody at home. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.